Good morning and welcome to another Kenny Cars and Coffee, or Coffee, Cars and Kenny. The people who've been watching for a while know what that means. But we also have a new contender, Cars, Whiskey and Kenny, and I'll get into that a little bit later on. But we got a lot of cool things to talk about today. If you're just joining us for the first time, I'm Kenny Brown, and we're going to spend the next hour answering your questions and try to share some of my extensive knowledge from over 40 years in motorsport, professional motorsports, and building performance cars. And the subject matter is always what you guys want to know. I talk about what you want to know, and the questions come from the Speed Therapy Society. If you're not a Speed Therapy Society member, join. I mean, there's going to be a lot of cool stuff in there. We're starting a reference file in there for the members. And I see some of those heart-shaped wrenches and thumbs coming up already. You guys are awesome. The main subjects today, and these are from people's questions, are going to be about from Brian, setting up ride height and how bump steer affects ride height or vice versa. A brief touch on aero, because that's a huge subject that David and Brad asked about. And kind of the show and tell is going to be related to Kobe wanted to know that Watts link and Panner bar and how that relates to roll center. And that's one of my favorite subjects, and you'll see why. Let's see, we got some shout outs. Andrew shared us with the Ford Performance Group. Mike shared with SVT Cobra's owners and Christian Car Club. Andrew shared with the Mustang Road Racers, and Brad shared with the Track Guys Performance Driving Events. That's great. We love that. If anybody else has some groups out there that you think that they could get some value and knowledge from what we're doing, please have them join up. And I'm sure Kerry knows how to do that, but I don't. But, okay, and you know what? What did you do? I guess we had a technical adjustment. Something I just realized this morning is this is the 15th episode.
Yes, 15.
I can't believe it. 15 Kenny Cars and Coffee. I don't know, it just goes that fast, and we keep coming up with good questions. Let's see some other. As you know, I gotta have my notes. I got too many things to remember. Some carryovers. You're gonna make me seasick.
Okay, why don't you just, is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
To me, it's okay. Is it okay to you?
Yep. Yes.
We're going to follow up on some questions from before, and also we talked about brake fluid and the temperatures. I think was it last week or the week before, and we're going to post up in the Speed Therapy Society the different dry boiling points of the different major brake fluids, and you're going to see why we've switched over to bare brake fluid, because it's got the highest dry boiling point, and the higher the better. Okay, and let's see, rotor temperature. I think Chris and somebody else asked about the life of our brake rotor temp. Well, we called the manufacturer, and according to them, the minimum is 2 years if it's kept in your garage. If you keep it in the trailer where it's hot all summer, it probably will last one season. I know I've had them for multiple seasons, and it's never gone bad. But the trick is to tell when it is starting to go off is if you start seeing little yellow crystals in there, then it's time to throw it away and get another one. And then we talked before that comes with this really handy chart on, see, as it starts out red, and as it gets hotter and hotter, the color changes. So you can see what the maximum temperature is on the rotor. And let's see, mine runs right here at about 1200 degrees in the front. Now the rear is just a little bit cooler. But so that's 2 years minimum, keep it in the garage. I've had some last longer than that. Also, we want to thank all the people that donated to the Resilience Racing Fundly campaign. Cliff, John, Dino, Andrew, Julie, Chino, and Rick. This is a super worthy cause. These guys are developing complete hand control system for wounded warriors that they can drive completely from the steering wheel. So even the guys that have prosthetic legs will be able to drive, and they're doing a racing series with that, which I think is amazing. And the just $25 donations, and that's to help finish off the hand controls. So like I say, it's a really good, really good cause. And you know, this is 15 episodes. How many of you guys have been with us since the very beginning? Let me know who's been here since the very beginning, and then who just joined and about what time they joined, because that's kind of interesting. I'm just blown away. Oh, remember to invite your buddies. I couldn't do this without Carrie's notes. And there's also, I try to do maybe 3-4 a week, complimentary 15-minute consults for people that have questions, need to make purchasing decisions. You know, I can help them with all that. I try to do the best. If I can answer the questions, I do. If I can't, then I'll tell them I can't. Let's see. Let's start. See, we got all the little stuff in. Also on the resource, some people have asked about a track day setup sheet. I've got the one I use is pretty much for pro racing, and there's a lot of stuff on there that you wouldn't need and could confuse you. So I'm going to pare that down to something a little more basic, and that we're going to talk about in the 5-day transform your driving experience. I know. When are we going to have it? Well, hopefully next week we'll be able to give you a date. This whole virus thing is just kind of throwing everything for a tizzy. So, but yeah, we're going to have that in the Speed Therapy Society and the Transform Your Driving Experience. That'll be part of the curriculum. We can get into, also, if you got questions, send your questions in. We'll take a segment and we'll talk about questions and answer your questions. So let's get into, here's the quick hitters. Okay, I said join Speed Therapy Society. We talked about shelf life of rotor paint. Jim Bauman is the one that came up with the Cars, Whiskey, and Kenny. And he says that there's over 100 more people watch this after the show than watch it live. And he's saying most of them probably watch it in the evening, so it should be Kenny, Whiskey, and Cars, Whiskey, and Kenny. However, he spelled whiskey, W-H-I-S-K-E-Y. I spelled whiskey, W-H-I-S-K-Y. What's the difference, you ask? I'm glad you asked. The W-H-I-S-K-E-Y is actually American whiskey or Irish whiskey. The W-H-I-S-K-Y is Scottish whiskey, Canadian whiskey, and malt that comes from Japan. So, and Scottish, because of my Scottish heritage, now I'm really have an affinity for single malt Scotch. It's one of my few pleasures in life, and I have a pretty good collection. If anybody's never tasted single malt Scotch, it's something you got to kind of have to warm up to. A lot of people, kind of, let's say it's a man's drink, okay? And let's see, artwork. Last week we had my dad ship from World War II, and this week we've got Jimmy Clark back up there. Can you see Jimmy Clark? Yeah. And he's the reason I put him back up because it's the month of May, and month of May in Indianapolis is pretty special. That's the Indy 500. Of course, it's later this year, but Jimmy Clark, my boyhood hero, won the Indy 500 in 1965 in a Lotus 38. And what in the world are you doing? And it threw me off. Anyway, I happened to be in person at the Watkins Glen Grand Prix in 1967 when Jimmy Clark won. And that is the day that kind of set my whole future in cars and motorsport. I mean, I came away from that just a whole different person. And it was pretty awesome to see. And so I've got Jimmy Clark back up here. That's actually Zandvoort. That's the first outing of the new, let's see, the new Lotus 49. And it kind of won going away. So that's why Jimmy Clark's up there. And this is also signed by Keith Duckworth. He was the Worth of the Cosworth group. Okay, let's get down to John Bauman. Cars, Whiskey, and Kenny. For people who are watching us at night, and let us know who you are and if you like Cars, Whiskey, and Kenny. I thought it's pretty cool. I like it. But John also is the World War II. He studies World War II, and I'll add a little more to what I talked about last week. My dad was in a destroyer escort in the Pacific Fleet, and he survived the war. Now his brother, my Uncle Norman, unfortunately he was in the Army Air Corps, and he's buried in Normandy. And my Uncle Alec, which is my mother's brother, was on the Merchant Marines, and their ship got sunk by a torpedo, and he was in the North Atlantic for, I don't know, a long time in the freezing water, and he survived, but he wasn't a real person after that. He was institutionalized for the rest of his life. So that's my World War II history for John. And Christopher is one who's looking for the car setup sheet, and like I say, that's going to be in the Speed Therapy Society. New members, where did you find out about us? I mean, that's always good information to know where people came from. If you just kind of stumbled on it or somebody shared it with you. Carrie always wants that information. Okay, we're going to get into, I think I got through all the stuff I'm supposed to say. Another thumbs up, car-shaped wrenches. We love those things. Brian Armstrong asked about ride height. Setting ride height, what's the best ride height, and how that affects bump steer. I'm going to start with ride height. The ride height is wherever you want it to be, quite frankly. That's why we use like JRZ shocks that have their coilovers and they're adjustable, so we can set the ride height to anything we want. But in looking at ride height in general, if you've got coilovers, kind of like a general rule is because it's all different. A lot depends on the car and the size of your tires. Look at this. Look at the diameter of your tires. If the diameter is 26.5 inches, then think around 27.5 would be a good ride height. And the way I measure ride height was just super simple. You just take a tape measure, measure from the ground through the center of the wheel up to the fender lip. Fender lips are a constant, so they're always there. Kind of like when we go racing, in a lot of series they have like a minimum ride height, and typically it's around 3.5 inches. So what we do is we'll set up kind of a little test block, go no go test block. That's if the ride height minimum is 3.5, we'll set it at 3.25. So we've got a little bit of extra room, and we'll get the ride height set perfect. Then go around and measure it all four corners. So we'll know on the fly that we can't go below that number, or we're going to run afoul of tech inspection. So that's an easy way to do it. And anytime you do, like if you're going to put a new set of shocks and springs on, check your ride height first, and then see what it is afterwards, because then you can adjust it. The other thing is just step back and look. Does the car look the way you want it to? Is it low enough? And the other thing to consider, if you've got a really steep driveway, you don't want it too low. You're going to kind of scrape going up. And also if you're in one of those places that have these stupid speed bumps, of course the Brits call them sleeping policemen. You don't want it too low, you're going to scrape across that. So that's how I kind of set ride height, and it's purely subjective. Like I say, a typical starting point is 1 inch above the tire diameter, which gives you about 1 inch clearance in the fenders. Now if you've got really wide fenders, you might be able to go a little bit lower. But if you go too low, then you're going to your suspension geometry starts going south. Getting down, we typically, like I say, we run a lot of like 26.7 inch tires, so we're looking at a 27.5, 27.75 ride height. So that's how to set ride height. Now the other part is bump steer. Now when you lower a car, it kind of affects bump steer. What is bump steer? Bump steer is when you go across a bump and the wheel wants to steer a different direction because of the geometry in the front end. Now, the easy, quick way, kind of like a really quick down and dirty way to adjust your bump steer, take a look at the lower control arm and the tie rod. If they're going in different directions, you're going to have severe bump steer. If they're parallel, you're going to take most of the bump steer out. Now, what we do, this is a standard tie rod end for a Mustang. You can see the height on it. We actually had a company make these up for us a number of years ago. It's called a bump steer tie rod end. Notice the difference. And the reason we did this, because a lot of people don't want, I mean, the other way to do bump steer is get some of these like rod end and do all the spacer thing to get it right. But rod ends take maintenance and they'll have a tendency to rattle. Or this is like OE quality, it's even greasable. So you just kind of put it on, and it's at a general height that will correct most Mustangs bump steer. If it doesn't correct it, it gets it a whole lot closer to what it was. So that's kind of a way we look at bump steer. Now the SN95s, that's kind of a whole different car. What we do with that is the steering rack is mounted on bushings. And what we do, let's see if you can see this, we use an offset rack bushing. And what we want to do is we want to move the rack up so we can kind of help the bump steer. And that's pretty quick and easy for adjusting bump steer on a SN95, or you can get the one that's got all the washers and rod ends and kind of work your way through that. So I hope that answered your question. The right height, whatever you want. But always be sure to record it whenever you're doing anything. Okay. I'm gonna jump down to Kobe, and we'll get back to Aero in a minute. And yes, if your questions are coming in,
I haven't asked yet, but
yeah, send your questions in. We're going to have plenty of time to get the questions today. As like I say, I talk about what you want to know about. So Kobe wanted to know my thoughts on Watts Link Panner Bar and then Roll Center. Okay, Watts Link and Panner Bar are basically the two systems of locating lateral location of the rear axle, anything that's got a parallel control arms. Now for cars that have double splayed control arms, that means one set goes this way, one set goes that way. That'll be self-centering, so that'll self-center the axle. But if you've got parallel control arms like in the S197, you have to use something to contain that lateral movement of the axle, and the only two ways, the basic ways, are the Watts Link and the Panner Bar. The Watts Link has been around for a really long time. And people probably know the Watts Link has some arms and it's got a bell crank in the middle. That keeps the axle centered. Watts Link has been around since 1784 when James Watts patented it. So that's been around a long time. Now Panner Bar is considerably newer. The Panner Bar came about with the Panhard Automobile Company of France in the early 1900s. So both of these methods have been around for a really long time, and they're probably much thing everybody uses, either a Watts Link or a Panner Bar to locate the axle. Like I say, nobody's come up with anything significant in the last 100 years. So we'll talk about that more in weeks to come. Now, the Watts Link is by far the best way to locate an axle because it lets the axle move perfectly up and down. A Panner Bar, because it's got a bar that runs across, it's going to be a little bit of an arc, so it's not going to be 100% up and down, but with the long Panner Bars that come in the Mustang, the arc isn't going to be that great. Now, where the Watts Link pivot point is, that's your roll center. Where the Panner Bar crosses the center line of the car, that's your roll center. Now, the Mustang roll center is pretty high. It's like they look right through the middle of the axle. And you can feel that if you think about going around a corner, spiritedly on track, you can feel that inside tire kind of get loose, or not loose, but kind of you get a little light in the back. That's because the point you're rolling around is in the middle of the axle. Now Watts Link, the problem with the Watts Link, I love them, but they're not practical for the S197. Because there's only so far you can move that Watts Link down when the bell crank will start hitting into stuff. So, I mean, that you can get, there's a lot of different ones out there. I haven't kept up with them. I know I'm seeing that they're adjustable. The ones that are on the chassis are better than the ones on the axle, in my view. Yeah, but here's the thing. you can't get it low. You can't move the roll center down. And I like low roll centers. It keeps the back of the car down. It takes some energy off the outside front, which will help the car turn, and you can get to the gas sooner through the middle of a corner because you don't have to wait as long for the axle to settle. Well, what we do, back in my Trans Am days in the 90s, what we did is we took a Watts link and we mounted it horizontal to the bottom of the differential. Now, it's easy in a Trans Am car because they've got what's called an underslung chassis, which means the chassis comes underneath the axle. So it's pretty easy to just run the Watts links over to the chassis, and you've got the benefits of a Watts link for axle control, and you've got the roll center at the bottom of the diff. What I do in our rear grip kit, which is rear grip kit is it's parts, but it's a complete engineered system for maximum traction and control in the back. And part of that key is what we call a roll center relocation kit. And I move the roll center down from the middle of the differential to the bottom of the differential. Remember that? Bottom differential, Trans Am. And we do that with a couple of brackets. Here, this is the axle bracket. And you can see we go down about 4 inches. I'll go this way. You can see the hole. We move the roll center down about 4 inches. And on the chassis side, this kind of just slides up in the panner bar thing. Again, you see we go down 4 inches, and there's two different holes at the bottom. And the reason for that is whichever hole makes it the most level. If it's about the same, always put in the bottom hole. That keeps the roll center down. And then with our panner bar, here's our panner bar, part of the rear grip kit. And like all our panner bars and control arms with the rod ends get anti-seize before they go in, and we have offset bushings. You can see that to keep the panner bar away from the differential. And just like on our lower control arms, we have what we call our rattle rings. And the purpose of that is, rod ends have a tendency to kind of move around. So if they move over, that's so they don't touch metal and don't rattle. Call them rattle rings. We've got that on these, and also the lower control arms. And the combination of the lower roll center is one of the keys, and the other key in our rear grip kit is moving the instant center, which is another geometrical thing, back from way out in front of the car to sort of like mid-car, which increases anti-squat, and anti-squat's what gives you traction, and anti-squat also gives you anti-lift. It helps when braking. Mustangs, stock Mustangs, you brake real hard and go, hold back to the car comes up. With the rear grip kit and the geometry in that, the back of the car, it doesn't want to come up as much. And if you have the front grip too, we bring the front roll center up and the rear roll center down. So you're going around a corner, the car where the car is rolling, it's not rolling as much, which gives you more grip. And you can, like I said, you can get to the gas a lot sooner. I'm typically almost full throttle by the time I hit the apex, and we always use late apex with S197 Mustangs. I think this is just one part of the system, and I stress system because every single part of the rear grip kit has an impact on geometry. I think maybe we'll talk about a little bit more of the whole geometry thing on the rear next week and show you all the pieces. So that's that. Now, what do we got for questions?
Oh, you didn't answer Aero.
Aero. Oh, Aero. Oh yeah, Aero. Let me put this back. Aero is a really, really big subject. Big subject, incredibly complex. And Aero can be your friend and your enemy all at the same time. Aero, obviously, the purpose of Aero is to create downforce to give you more grip. But when you're creating downforce, you're also creating drag. Anytime I work on a new platform, like when we did some development on the S550, I always get the mechanical grip maximized first. Once we've got mechanical grip, then we'll add some aero to try to add additional grip. Now you can add a wing to the back or a splitter to the front. It's best if you do both because the wing may overpower the front depending on how it's set. Also, a lot of people will set their wing too aggressively, and that'll kill top end. You want absolutely as little wing as possible to get the downforce. which is also, you can think about what I talked about, like our JRZ shocks. You want them as soft as possible for control. So, I mean, you always want to be in the minimum to get for the most speed. And a splitter on the front, wing on the back. As far as front splitters, I saw a study that said anything more than a 4-inch splitter added drag and no more downforce. So you never want to, that's below the lip, you never want to go more than 4 inches. So that's kind of like the main pieces of aero. And then they also asked about canards and side splitters. What they didn't ask about is a very extremely important piece of aero. And it does not, this is the one piece of aero that does not slow the car down, it speeds it up. And that's a vented hood. A vented hood does two important things. One, it lets heat out of the engine compartment. Two, it exhausts hot air from the radiator out the top of the car. What happens, you're going 100 miles an hour down the straight, air is just cramming through the radiator. Once it gets through the radiator, where does it go? Well, the only place for it to go is down. So if it goes down, what's happening is you're creating positive pressure underneath the nose of the car. And some people have noticed at really high speed, their car might feel like it's getting a little floaty. One of the possibilities, two possibilities: one, there's not enough caster in the car. The other is you've got too much positive pressure built up underneath the car. So, I mean, a vented hood is the easiest way to improve your aerodynamic and front grip. And so much so that back before Ford came out with the 302 Boss S, the race car, my late son Paul was trying to convince him to use his vented hood. And they kind of, I don't know, it's worth it. So when they were testing at Groton, he brought one of his vented hoods, and they didn't do anything but change the hood, and they actually picked up seconds in time. So that's why Paul's vented hood was part of the Boss 302S. And then the wing, the G-Force wing, that also was, Paul was strongly involved in that. Now, unfortunately, the G-Stream wing is out of production because Dave, who was building them, has retired. If anybody would like to see that wing come back, let me know and send the comments in, or if you know anybody else that might want that wing back. It's extremely efficient. I mean, it starts working at 40 miles an hour. That's how efficient it is, and it has very little drag. And you don't run it more than maybe 1-2 degrees of angle of attack, and it works really well. So, I mean, if anybody would like to see that wing come back, let me know, and I'll see if there's any possibility, because we keep getting calls on that wing, and it's an awesome wing. Anyway, the vented hood is a great way to increase aero. Now, once you get those are kind of like the three main things. And other people talk about side splitters. I've been putting side splitters on my car ever since, I guess, we introduced Kermie at SEMA. Sorry about that. And what a side splitter is just, I brought that over again from Trans Am Racing. The side splitter is just a piece we put on between the two wheels, the two tires, that is horizontal to the ground, and it extends the lip from the car out about 2 inches. Now, what that does is the car, going down the straightaway, the airflow has a tendency to curve under the car, and if it curves under the car, it's going to build up air in the back of the car. So if we're building up air in the back of the car, what's that? It's positive pressure. It's going to loosen up the back of the car. So side splitters help the air from rolling underneath. And then kind of like if you're really serious, you might want to add a diffuser. Unfortunately, there's not really great diffusers in the aftermarket. They're more for show than go. But what a good diffuser does, it actually cleans up the air coming from underneath the car. It also, people don't know, is it also helps the efficiency of the wing. So a diffuser and the wing kind of work together. Let's see, canards. Canards go at the front of the car, and a lot of people put canards on. I don't know why. Of course, they look cool, but it's anytime you add something to a car, you want to be looking for a result or an outcome. Don't just put things on because that guy put it on, it's cool, or that guy put it on, it's cool. think about what you want to achieve. I mean, if you've got your mechanical grip completely sorted out and you want to add more aero grip, then use a wing and a splitter in the front. Now we've got, since the G-Stream wing has been out of production, we've got another wing that we've been using that's extremely efficient. It's kind of a 3D wing. What that means is if you look at the wing straight on, it kind of humps up in the middle and humps down. That's perfect for sedans because what it does, it moves the leading edge of the wing up a little bit. So for a sedan, air coming over the top, it helps it get underneath the wing. And it's so efficient that in order to keep from creating drag and cutting your top speed, we actually run that at a positive 3 degrees, meaning the front of the wing is 3 degrees higher than the back of the wing. And that seems to be the compromise for speed and downforce. So we've got, if you're looking for G-Stream wing and just to have a wing, let us know. We can get you fixed up with the one we're using, and we have it for S195, S197, and S550s. In fact, anybody saw Maryland, the super Mustang that we built, that's got what we call the Club Sport 2 wing, and it's pretty cool. So that's kind of like the brief thing of aero. Another thing that people don't know about aero is that they think that, like, I say back in the Can-Am days when McLarens and Porsches were running, a lot of cars had kind of a sloped nose. People thought that was the best aerodynamic solution, is have that sloped nose to get the air over the car. Actually, in reality, it's not, because what happens is the air actually crashes into the nose, and it creates some downforce, yes, but also creates drag. Through wind tunnel testing, and I got this from O'Reilly Technologies, because we used to be right next door to them, and then they were just kind of down the street here in Indianapolis, and we know those guys really well. But what they said is, in their wind tunnel testing, air likes to move around objects fast. So now what you're seeing, like in the WC cars and the prototype cars, the front fenders are kind of blunt and they have a real sharp curve. Well, aerodynamically, that's the best solution. So, as this air likes to move around a curve, which brings me to something else that's very important on aerodynamics on a Mustang. A lot of people will use like the outside lights, the running lights or blinker lights, whatever's in the fender, or in the bumper. They'll use that, and they'll try to use that to duct air into the brakes because it's simple and easy. There's a hole there, they just duct it in. Wrong place to put it. The reason is that's on the curve of the car, and as the air, the maximum pressure for air pressure on the car is right in the middle of the car. The further you get out, the pressure starts to die down because it's picking up speed to go around. Fast air is low pressure, slow air is high pressure. So what happens is actually it will, because the light in the bumper is on the curve, it'll actually pull air out of the brakes. Because the air running around, it's going to suck air out. Here's a little tidbit is when I was running engineering the Mustang Challenge cars for Speedworks, we did kind of a back-to-back test between the Ford 4-inch brake duct and my 3-inch brake duct. And the net result was that the temperatures were close to the same, except my rotor temperatures were identical inside and outside. And on the Ford Racing 4-inch, the inside was cooler than the outside, which meant that was why we got such different brake pad wear. And that's because coming down that big 4-inch hole, if you looked at one, the rotor's right about there. Well, the air's crashing into that rotor, and it's creating turbulence as it has to go around. So all that air is getting squeezed down and creating turbulence. So actually, kind of restricts the airflow somewhat. But with my 3-inch brake ducts, what I've done, handy prop, is we take a 3-inch duct and we make it oval. And the reason for that is if you put that right up against the rotor, 100% of the air goes into the eye of the rotor, which is important. The more air in the rotor, the better it's going to cool. So putting the duct on the outside, or on the edge, don't do that. you want to get your ducts as close to the center as possible because that's going to be the most pressure, the most airflow. So there's another little tidbit on aerodynamics, and you get everything in the wrong place, and that's going to affect aerodynamics. Here's another interesting fact. Now you see on these cars they got big openings for the radiators, and then like the supercharged cars they make them even bigger. On my race cars, what I do is I will take the area of the radiator, cut it in half, and I will build a box that necks down the opening to half the size of the radiator. You're going to say, well, doesn't that hurt airflow? Well, no. What happens is, remember I said, when the air hits it, it goes through, and because there's a big volume, it expands. And it expands, which means it slows down, which means it goes slower through the radiator, which means it cools better. We had one World Challenge car we did in 2004, I think, that it was so efficient, we actually had to block off the radiator because we couldn't get the car over 195 degrees. So, I mean, that's something that only on race cars. On street cars, it's a little difficult to do, but you always want to, wherever your radiator is, make sure it's got good fences on the side that block the air from going around, because if there's not, then the air, rather than going through the radiator, is going to go around it. I've seen people that complain about overheating. They got a big radiator, the car overheats, but you look down and it's just sitting in space, and so the air is going around it, not through it. So there's lots of aerodynamics. Have I missed anything?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Well, on aerodynamics, I have, but that's enough for today. Okay, in case you're, my signs again. In case you're just joining us, I'm Kenny Brown. This is Kenny Cars and Coffee, Cars and Coffee with Kenny, or Cars, Whiskey, and Coffee, whichever you prefer. And I spent an hour answering your questions and trying to transfer to you some extensive knowledge I've gained over 4 decades in professional motorsports and building high-performance cars. And if you like Cars and Coffee, I mean, invite your friends. If you got some friends that you think would really enjoy this and learn from it, invite them. I mean, we're happy to have them. And remember to join the Speed Therapy Society. That's a private Facebook group, because we can do more there than we can on Facebook Live. And in there's a units section, which has, we're going to keep adding resources to that unit section. We've got a few things in there. The brake temperature is going to, the fluid temperature is going to go in there. The rotor temperature plate is going to go in there. I think a couple weeks back, we put the checklist for getting the car ready to go to the track. That's in there, and we'll keep adding things to the resource file. So I think I am. Oh, on these brake ducts. This is actually the brake duct for a 550, and you can see it's round. That's because that whole roundness goes into the center of the eye. We didn't need to, because of the spindle and the rotor. We didn't need to squash it down. We squash them down for SN95s and S197s. Okay, we're ready for the questions.
Okay, we have a couple questions on aero. So let's see. Chris Melitude, do windshield wipers cause problems with aero?
I'd say yes. I can tell you on our race cars, we never run a race car with windshield wipers. They always come off. If it's an event where there might be rain, we always park the windshield wipers straight up and down. And you've probably seen this like in prototypes. That way that it's not, if it's down, it's going to be hitting the wind and fluttering. If it's straight up and down, the wind's kind of go around it. But never run windshield wipers on a race car unless it's going to rain. And if it's going to rain, we always have it set up so even the driver can shut it off so it's right in the middle. And that creates the best airflow. So the answer is yes, it does affect airflow. Other interesting thing is the base of the windshield is super high pressure area. Now a lot of people put cowl induction hoods on and open the back up, think they're going to like cool the engine. Just the opposite happens. If you have on those hoods that's open in the back at the base of the windshield, that's high pressure. It's going to go back into the engine compartment. The cars, like the way to use that to your advantage is like again with Trans Am cars and some other race cars, like the old ran carburetors, things like that. We would build a box around the carburetor, a sealed box, and have it go back to the fender well, the firewall, right in the middle where the pressure is greatest, because that's going to suck right into the engine. So it's kind of a long answer to a simple question.
Okay, let's see. Does a cowl hood offer any of the aero benefits of hood vents? If so, how much of a cowl?
Cowl hood, I just answered that. Cowl hoods don't give you any advantage in cooling or anything, because the opening at the cowl is right at the base of the windshield. That's a super high pressure area, and that's, like I say, it's high pressure enough that for race cars we use that as high pressure to push into the air cleaner and into the carburetor. So I mean, what you really need is, if you've got a cowled hood, block it off in the back and get some aftermarket vents or something, put some vents in it. There are some people that have vents. I know that we can get carbon vents from Genesis. We've got a connection there. If anybody's interested in adding vents, I actually did that to George's Mustang a few years back. We're updating it. It was a CSR we built in 2001, I think, and it's I think in 99 or 2000, I can't remember, Cobra, and we updated it. He had a supercharger put on, and motors making just monster power. So we made a lot of updates to the Aero, and it was the splitter in the front, wing in the back, and the hood. He already had a carbon hood, which is really, really nice. So what we did is, I got some of these carbon vents from Genesis, and I got wide ones and narrow ones, and we cut the hood out and we put them in, and it looks pretty cool, and it worked like a charm. So cowl in the back, that pressurizes the engine. Vents in the front, that exhausts the engine, and kind of like the best part, where the best part is to put the vents is just after the curve of the front, because that's where air is moving really, really quickly. And that you're going to like suck the air coming across the nose is going to be fast moving, which means if the vents are just behind that, it's going to just suck the air right out from the engine. So I hope I answered that one.
Also, George is selling his car. He
Oh, yeah, I
can't
forgot
get
to tell
another
you.
Kenny Brown car until he sells it.
George has absolutely wicked. The one I was just talking about. It's a 2001 Kenny Brown CSR, and he had it engine gone through. It's got all absolutely top-notch stuff in the engine, supercharged, makes 700 horsepower maybe, and it's got the full suspension. I mean, it's a super duper track car, and he wants a new Kenny Brown car, but his wife won't let him get a new one until he sells that one. It's kind of the story: you bring another one home, you're going to be sleeping in it. So his car's for sale. If you know anybody that's looking for absolutely amazing, a really cool car, I mean, it's got everything. He's got, I would say, well over 70,000 invested in it, and all he wants for it is 35,000. Anybody interested, let us know. We can get you some information. Actually, we'll post some up, and can we put that in Speed Therapy or give a link or something?
Well, see if people want it.
If anybody's interested, yeah, we can get you some information. Because it's kind of like it's there's some of our cars that are more special than others. This is one of the cars that's more special than others.
Okay, and let's see.
Hey, can we post pictures in the Speed Therapy?
Yeah.
I've got some pictures of what we did to the hood with the Genesis vents. I'll stick them in there so you can see that if you've already got a carbon hood or a hood you like. You can turn it into a vented hood with some Genesis air vents.
Okay, a couple more aero questions. This is from Brian West. What do you think? Oh, by the way, last question was from Carl Wirtz. I don't think we're on the cowl hood. Brian West, what do you think of the wing Roush used on the R197R?
I don't know.
Okay, what do you think of the wing Roush used on the the S197? You don't know.
Send me a picture. I mean, I'm not familiar with it. Send me a picture, and I'll tell you what I think. I mean, there's some wings that work really well, and there's some wings that are purely aesthetic. A good example on the FR500 S cars for the Mustang Challenge. They had a wing on the back, and it created 19 pounds of downforce at 0 miles an hour, which meant that it really doesn't make much downforce. But the engineers who were building the car thought that they were going to charge $75,000, and for $75,000 the car needed a wing. They just got kind of a basic wing. and it's heavy and it doesn't do much. Although there's a trick. There's a trick I have for people that have the FR500S. If you take like a piece of angle aluminum, it sticks up a little bit, you can go across and you can like drill holes through the back of the wing and like use 1032 bolts and go across and put a little gurney lip at the back that actually helps make the wing work. So that's, you know, there's an example of a wing that was mostly aesthetics, but I figured out a way to make it work. Okay?
Let's see. Brian West also asked if the 08 GT500 hood is good for venting.
08 GT500 hood. Is that the one that's already got the vents in the front? I'm trying to think. I can't remember which one that is.
Answer that next week.
Yeah, why don't I look at that and I'll answer that next week.
Let's see. Are Tiger hoods still available?
Our Tiger hood's still available. That's kind of a sad story.
Hoods are.
When Paul passed away, they just kind of constricted the business and they cut us out. They cut a whole bunch of other people out, and only went through one distributor. And then once Carol passed away, then her father just kind of burned everything or threw everything away. We do have some guys we know that have sort of a copy of the Tiger hood. So the long story short, the Tiger hood is not available, but we have access to a hood that's very similar, the S197, if you're interested.
They've actually made a few upgrades to it.
And they made some upgrades. I forgot to mention that.
Okay, Afondi Winter, is the lip on an SN95 Mach 1 a functional aero piece?
What, your Mach 1?
Doesn't say what, SN95 Mach 1. Doesn't say the aero.
Okay, I can't remember exactly what that aero piece was, but for when we do like 99 up Cobras, they've got kind of this little lip in the back. Another trick I do, this is real easy, we get some ABS plastic and we'll cut a strip and we like pop rivet it all across the back that sticks up about that much above the wing, and that creates downforce. If you do something like that, here's a tip. Start in the middle and with your pop rivets and work out. If you start at one end and get to the other, it's going to be like really weird. So we start in the middle and work outwards. But that's quick and easy. We've done that a lot and it works really good. Just ABS. Have it stick up about that much above the back of the wing in the back, and it works like crazy.
Okay. There's a couple other questions on aero. Is the 2010 GT500, the fog lights are set in. Would it be an effective place to put tape over those holes? Would it be effective to put tape over those holes?
The GT500, I have a difficult time remember every model, what's on the front. But if it's the one that have what do you call the
fog lights?
Fog lights in the front, brake ducts, man. Those are your brake ducts. It's a real simple, easy conversion. If you don't have all the extra stuff in there, because we get an adapter, that's like a 4-inch hole. We adapt it down to a 3-inch hole and right into the brakes.
On Chris's car, who we've done already, so this is you're probably thinking different than fog lights because we would have put them there. So Chris, why don't you respond back whether we put the brake ducts in your fog lights or if they're separate? Does that make sense?
For what's your car?
It's 2010 GT500.
Well, I gotta look at that.
We'll cover this next week, so we're not telling bad
I'll do some
information.
research and get back to you next week.
Let's see. You can take a sip of coffee.
Yeah, good idea. Except I'm almost out, which means we're almost out of time.
Yeah. Are the rear spoilers like the one on the Boss 302 Laguna Seca effective? That's from Steve Smith.
Here I'm trying to visualize it.
What? Would you want to answer that next week?
I'll answer that next week, because we've done a number of Laguna Secas, and I just I do so many cars. I got a good Laguna Seca little story. part of what makes our program so good is our customers give us great feedback, which helps us develop products better and make things better. Well, we talked about Tim Thomas. I got the H&R coilover setup for his car. He put them on the front, went right on. He was super happy. But we went to the back. The H&R's, it's got a bayonet type mount at the top. It's designed to reuse the factory upper shock bushings. Well, Laguna Seca uses the Kikos. I think it's the Kikos or adjustable shock, and it's a whole different thing. So we learned that we have for Laguna Secas, we got to use one of our. We've got a bushing set we can use. It's actually the bushings. It's a really hard rubber. It's the bushings that pull off our strain shocks. The strain shocks for the rear, they come with these really good, nice, strong bushings. But when we convert the coilover, we're putting a lot of weight and pressure right up into the top of the shock. So what we've done, we've made up a Delron bushing for the bottom, so that it doesn't squish down from all the load of the spring and shock in the car.
Okay, Andrew Morrell, is there a possibility?
And thanks, Tom, for letting us know. That's a good piece of information that we'll keep and cherish forever.
Cliff Glynn, what about those front fender vents, aero heat extraction?
Front fender vents. Okay, here's the thing about front fender vents. It really depends on how they're set up. If they're inset a little bit, they're going to be more efficient at pulling air out. Something that I've done in the past is looking at, like, let's say we're on the driver's side, looking at the wheel well. At 11 o'clock on the tire is the highest pressure inside the wheel housing. I'll cut that out so that high pressure air can flow across the top of the inner panel and then out the ducts on the side. If it's just kind of a flat thing, it may or may not. It just depends on, you got to have to give the reason for the air to come out there, either pressure from the inside or lack of pressure from the outside to suck it out. That's why it's always, it just depends on which style of fender vent. But the answer, yeah, they can be really effective if they're engineered in concert with some other things so that they actually suck air out. That's another thing. You suck air out, you create downforce in the front. So air is your friend there because you're sucking it out and creating downforce.
Okay, just heard back from, I wasn't listening to you today. So Tim Thomasak, did you talk about his H&R?
Yeah, I just did.
Okay, great. Okay,
I thanked him for the information.
Oh, that's what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, he said his UPS box just showed up. So
he kind of ran into a spot with the bushing thing. So what we've done, we actually overnight Saturday morning delivery the hard rubber bushings for him to use so he can get the car together.
Okay, will you be designing a super street cage for the S550 like you did for the SN95 and?
Boy, street cages. It's kind of a difficult subject because since our super bad experience in Chicago, we haven't been in a position to bring street cages back. We've been focusing almost completely on getting all the suspension systems re-engineered, updated, and getting them to the market. It's like in the forward plans, but not for a while. What we do use for S550s, we got a great roll bar that we get from Watson. And a lot of our customers with 550 cars, we get them, they put them in, they look great, they work good. So we won't be doing a super street cage for a while, but we do have a solution for the 550 cars.
Okay.
Yeah, for those who don't know, our super street cages were awesome. It was a main hoop, and this all made a heavy duty tubing, and two bars that went back that typically hooked into the fender wells for support. And we also had a low running bar that went up side the driver and then bolted to the floor up by his foot. So we actually added rigidity between the B pillar and the A pillar, and then with the struts going back, that really stabilized the roll street cages. And we left it open for the street so people can get in and out of the back seat. However, we have a lot of guys that do track things, so we used to put both a horizontal and diagonal bar through them. I mean, maybe next year I really would hope to get the street cages back.
Oh.
And then the Fox street cages were really cool, and they were also really popular.
What's really helpful is add your name in the comments if you're interested, and we'll put you on a list. The bigger the wait list is, the faster it goes.
Oh, that's
to
a really good
production.
point. Any of the stuff that I talk about that is like a future product that might be like a year or so away, if you're interested, let us know. Get your name on the list, because the bigger that list gets, the closer that'll come to production. If you know, because typically I say when people come to me and want a specific special part, I say, well, the minimum we can do is like 10 pieces. So get 10 people that want it, we'll do it. So it's kind of like the same thing. The more people we get that are interested in the product, the sooner it comes to production.
Okay, I think I read this by Christopher Sauter. Thoughts on front fender vents for an S197 house wheelhouse vents? Question mark. Did you kind of cover that?
Yeah, we can get Celine type fender vents for S197s, which it's kind of like it's got a big gap and it's offset inset, which can work efficiently if you've got some routing inside to get that high pressure air from in front of the tire all around the back and out. So I mean, yeah, there's a number of companies that have vents. Some purely aesthetics, and some actually work. Okay,
John Woolbright. We have 2 questions left, and the last one you may answer next week. But John Woolbright, any advice for the GT350 folks that feel the rear end wiggling under heavy braking?
You notice a big sigh. S550s. I haven't been so busy, haven't got to them yet as far as creating new products. But what we do the S550 is we do a spring and shock change. That's if you don't have the MagneRide, we can do a spring and shock change. The MagneRides, I mean, you're stuck. I mean, about the best spring rate you can get in the front is about 200 pounds, and that kind of, you know, that's not really what you need for track. That's why my GT4, like I got a customer with a 2017 GT4, just a straight GT4. It does have one of the 5.2 engines. He just walks away from GT350s like they're not even there. So I mean, it's a great car, but it needs some real updating things. I'm gonna look at that. One thing I do on the 550s is I'll put with the coilover shocks, with JRZ shocks, I'll put a sway bar in the front. Won't put a sway bar in the back. And the reason for that, when we were doing our original testing on S197, working on mechanical grip with Aero, what we found is we used an adjustable sway bar in the back, and I had to set it at full soft because the car kept getting loose. So I decided, you know, why don't we just leave the stock one in the back to kind of settle down the back of the car and just put a bigger one in the front. So I don't upgrade the rear sway bars in S550s. And the thing about S550's rear suspension is it's kind of weird. To me, it does some interesting things. I'm sure the engineers, there's a reason they do everything, and it's typically a very good reason. But it's kind of, I don't know. It needs some work, because in my opinion, the back of the S550 is way too loose right out of the box. The reason I say that is I've noticed the majority of 550 cars I've noticed that have crashed, it's the back end of the car because the back got loose. We had an example with a customer that was doing really, really good on track. Really, I mean, he was like running at the head of his group with a 550, and he decided to take off all the nannies. I think there's like 3 levels of nanny devices. Well, traction control always has to come off first, but I think there's like 1 or 2 more. Well, he took them all off. So all the helpers were off. First lap, he backed into the wall because the car got loose. So I mean, I have a fear of the back of the S550s. You know, maybe next year I know what I want to do, but it's a complete overhaul. But you know, until then, our solution is a good set of springs and shocks. If you get our JRZs, they're single adjustable, and that'll actually help hold the back of the car down, so it won't get so squirmy. because with the stock shocks, I mean they're set up for the street, and with the JRZs we set them up for high spring rates, which will pull and you can adjust them. It has a rebound, so that controls the retraction of the spring, so you can slow down how fast the spring comes up to keep the back of the car down.
Okay, this is the one I think we're going to do for next week. This is from Herstifer, and I don't know if he asked us a couple weeks ago. I don't know if we ever answered
Had a coffee
it.
at 12 o'clock, imagine that.
So this is Herstifer says, last week you talked about the Kenny Brown packages for the Mustang, and I had a question previously about the top 5 starter mods for the Trek. Can you give me more info on the direction to build for Trek and where I should start
That's a
first?
really good question, and I think that'll be a subject of next week.
Okay.
Because remember, what I talk about is the questions that come in through the Speed Therapy Society, because I will talk about what you want to learn about or know about. So that'll be a subject for next week. And other questions, send them in Speed Therapy. It's been great. I've seen lots of thumbs and those aren't really hearts. Those are wrenches that just happen to be deformed as hearts. So heart-shaped wrenches fly up and thumbs. We love all that. It helps us spread the program around, and I can't believe this is 15 weeks. It just blows me away.
Oh, we had a number of people that have been here since the start.
Carrie said we have a number of people who've been here from the start. Thank you guys. You're awesome. Let's head for the next 15 weeks.
Okay.
So with that, I'm going to thank everybody for being here. All those wrenches are flying up. The thumbs are flying up. That's awesome. And we already have the first subject for next week, so send in more questions. And we got first two questions for next week. Send in some more questions, and that's going to be what I talk about next week. So until next week, the weather's getting great. Everything's loosening up. Get out and drive. Enjoy your car.